In the centuries after Christ's death, the formation of a centralized religion based around Christ had been a large undertaking. With Christians being largely persecuted during the first 3 centuries, it was no easy task. The Christians didn't even have an agreed-upon holy book until the 382 AD Council of Rome, in which Pope Damasus I had enlisted Catholic Church officials to come up with a canon, expelling any books that either had no relevance to the overall story of Christianity, no historical efficacy, or complete and utter heretical teachings. The most famous of these books that did not make it into the Bible was the Book of Enoch. With a canon established, the battle for a centralized Christianity and Christian philosophy did not end there, or really ever end for that matter. The Bible is a book that is almost a slave to its interpretation. Sure, there are very clear doctrines and rules, love thy neighbor as thyself, but for a more specific and universal idea of Christ, God, the Holy Spirit, heaven, creation, and even the church, have been a matter of conversation by the Christian community at large for centuries. Some interpretations of these ideas are considered too out there and therefore unreasonable, and were considered heresies. Heresy is defined by Merriam-Webster Dictionary as an opinion, doctrine, or practice contrary to the truth or to the generally accepted beliefs or standards. In Christianity, historically, heresies against the faith have been seen as extremely important to quell by the Catholic Church through most of its history, some of which even involving punitive measures like what Augustine of Hippo suggested for the Manichaeans. Fast forwarding to modern times, there is no death sentence for those who may have beliefs that are heretical to the Christian faith. However, today the judgment for perceived heresies and controversial beliefs within the Christian faith usually fall to the court of public opinion, especially in widely publicized events concerning Christianity. A lot of times this comes down to artistic works and representations of Christianity. Whether it's Bible story movies like Exodus, Gods and Kings, and Noah, the infamously and rightfully disrespected God's Not Dead films, or in the cases that we'll be looking at in this video, films about Jesus Christ, more specifically Martin Scorsese's 1988 film, The Last Temptation of Christ, and Mel Gibson's 2004 film, The Passion of the Christ. In 1961, Martin Scorsese was attending NYU Film School, where his friend and future assistant editor John Mavros would give him a copy of Nikos Kazantzaki's novel, The Last Temptation of Christ. However, it wasn't until the filming of Martin Scorsese's 1972 film Boxcar Bertha, when lead actress Barbara Hershey gave Scorsese a copy of the book and urged him to read it, that he would ultimately become acquainted with the work. Scorsese loved the book. He felt it resonated with him on a deeply spiritual level. Scorsese got both Paul Schrader, the writer of his films Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, as well as Jay Cox to write the script of the film. Cox went uncredited due to WGA guidelines and issues with his contract, however. In 1981, Scorsese had a finished script and an industry that was more than willing to take a chance on him, considering the critical successes of the past decade, like Taxi Driver and Raging Bull. Paramount had originally made an offer in the $14 million range for the production of the film, and it was set to be filmed in Israel. Scorsese even went on to meet with Kazantzaki's widow. The two of them came to an understanding not only of the project itself, but the reality that there would be a controversy to follow the film's release. Prior to the start of production, tons of letters and complaints swarmed in from disapproving Christian groups who felt the film was going to do things like make Jesus a homosexual and tell a blasphemous tale of their savior. A film like this not only shouldn't have been made in their eyes, but it was also a direct affront to their beliefs as a whole. The campaign to stop the film from being made was almost successful. Not only was the film dropped from its original studio financiers, and it took 4 years before the film would ever see sponsorship from Universal Pictures for half the budget it originally had. The film would end up starring Willem Dafoe as Jesus and Harvey Keitel as Judas. However, with the new studio and a smaller budget, Scorsese felt constantly rushed on the set of the film, with some days going over and several late starts. There was immense pressure on Scorsese not to go over budget and take up even more of the studio's time when the film just barely got made at all in the first place. Scorsese vented some of this frustration in video diaries that he shot while on set in Morocco.
Of making the film, but it's almost impossible. And anyway, we had almost finished the scene yesterday in one piece, but in one day, but it didn't work out.
Scorsese's depiction of Jesus was not the first nor the last controversial biopic about him. Pier Paolo Pasolini's film, The Gospel According to St. Matthew from 1964, was also a very hotly debated film in its day. But no film about Jesus would see the similarities of the pre-production woes Scorsese came to know until the early 2000s, when Mel Gibson decided to take a crack at the story of Christ's crucifixion. Gibson, a Catholic like Scorsese, also had a spiritual fascination with the story of Jesus. His first inspiration for the film came about 15 years prior to its release, Gibson stating in the making of the film documentary that he had gotten to the point in one's life when you consider the bigger questions. The Passion of the Christ in the Bible had been a personal meditation for Gibson, and he started doing a lot of research on the event. He figured someone should create a visual record. However, it wasn't until the filming of the film We Were Soldiers, which Mel Gibson starred in, that he came to producer Stephen McAvity and expressed wanting to make a film about the Passion. The script for the film was penned by Gibson and screenwriter Benedict Fitzgerald. Gibson wanted the film to be made in Latin, Hebrew, and Aramaic to provide a more authentic and unexpected experience for the audience and to put a greater focus on visual storytelling. Rather famously, Passion of the Christ was an independent feature. Gibson approached several studios to try and get financing for the project, but they all turned him down. Gibson ended up self-financing the film for $30 million, a huge risk to take on a subtitled film in America that would be about an increasingly controversial topic and figure in history. This, in part, was probably a big reason studios couldn't bring themselves to give Gibson the funds, as America was in a bit of a chaotic state with the Bush administration in power and an increasing division between liberals and evangelical Christians, who were widely represented by the controversial president. With Gibson's own money on the line, this was a film he had to make work. He found his set at Cinecittà Studios in the city of Materna, Italy, on the very grounds where Martin Scorsese had just finished his production of The Gangs of New York. The sets were torn down and reconstructed in order to look like ancient Jerusalem. He gathered a cast which included Jim Caviezel as Jesus, Monica Bellucci as Mary Magdalene, who actually wasn't the preferred choice at first for the film, and Maya Morgensen as Mary. During the filming, Gibson consulted with theological consultants, two of them being Friar Jonathan Morris and a local priest named Philip J. Ryan. They not only were there for Gibson's research purposes, but also to provide confession, communion, and masses for the cast and crew of the film. In fact, religion and spiritual discussions on the set were very much the norm on the movie. Father John Burdenek said of his time on the set, "Everyone felt comfortable talking about issues of faith. Being a priest in the midst of that was like a lightning rod for spiritual conversations." The production on the film went pretty standard. However, it was also a site for bizarre and painful experiences for Jim Caviezel, who had been struck by lightning, accidentally whipped with a wooden rod a couple times, was crushed accidentally by the wooden cross he was carrying in the scene, and experienced regular migraines as a result of his left eye being cosmetically swollen. Both The Passion of the Christ and The Last Temptation of Christ are rather infamous for the controversies they conjured during their releases. With Scorsese's film, there was a big push both before and after its release to silence the film from rather prominent Christian groups as a measure for keeping a supposed blasphemous film at bay from the general public. See, the novel The Last Temptation of Christ was already an extremely controversial book when it had come out in the mid-50s. Kazantzakis was already very demonized in his homeland of Greece for his books The Last Temptation of Christ and Christ Re-Crucified. These two books were considered blasphemous by the Greek Orthodox Church. This reputation succeeded Kazantzakis' death and therefore was a big cause for the controversy when it came out. And very quickly, when Scorsese's film was set to release, the controversy only got worse than it was in the early 80s. While Nikos faced backlash from the Greek Orthodox Church, Scorsese found himself at odds with a different denomination. In this case, Christian evangelicals in America. Names like Tim Penland and Bill Bright acted as the leaders of this rather intellectually and ethically dishonest campaign to attack the film before it had even been released or seen by them. In fact, almost all the initial criticism for the film came from those who hadn't seen it. More evangelicals like Jerry Falwell and Donald Wildman, Pat Boone, Pat Robertson, and Pat Buchanan all shared their disapproval. Even Franco Zeffirelli threatened to pull his film Young Toscanini out of the Venice Film Festival due to them inviting The Last Temptation of Christ to screen there. The Last Temptation of Christ had a reputation that preceded it, even without anyone having ever seen it or knowing the perspective with which the film had been made. To this day, the film is received rather well within the community of film critics and the community of online cinephiles, including fans of Martin Scorsese. The main point of controversy in the film surrounded a dream sequence in which Jesus comes off the cross and has sex with Mary Magdalene, grows old, and has a family. his final temptation to be selfish and not save humanity, but rather himself. The idea of these images in the film were met with such an abhorrence from the religious groups that it didn't matter that the film was created from the source of a man that belonged to the Greek Orthodox faith, written by a man who was raised in the Calvinist tradition, and directed by a Catholic. Now, when it comes to the Passion of the Christ, the controversy centered around the film came from a very different group. The Passion of the Christ received mixed critical reception. Remember, when Gibson couldn't get the funding for The Passion of the Christ, a part of that story that some might not be familiar with is that there was an apparent repulsion from the studios due to what was perceived as blatantly anti-Semitic content that was laid throughout the script. And this wasn't even Gibson's first run-in with the controversy of possible anti-Semitism. There were reports made by Winona Ryder herself that Mel Gibson had asked her at a party if she was a, quote, oven dodger. Mel Gibson's father, Hutton, a Catholic traditionalist, also espoused anti-Semitic views throughout his career, even making controversial statements about the Holocaust. Upon the release of The Passion, it became one of the main critiques of the film. The images and themes in the film were considered by some critics to be drenched in anti-Semitism. However, this didn't just end at critics. The Anti-Defamation League had come out against the movie, backing up all the claims of anti-Semitism. The ADL claimed that Passion plays historically had an anti-Semitic slant and were rooted in anti-Semitic sentiment. They had issues with the idea that Jews were singularly responsible for the death of Jesus in the film. The Jewish authorities in the film obviously pay Judas for the betrayal of Jesus, a scene which contains what was seen as a problematic image of Judas groveling on the ground picking up coins. Throughout the crucifixion sequences, the Jewish people are not only portrayed as extremely bloodthirsty for his death, with very few Jews coming to his aid, and most being very reluctant, but there also was a visual motif of associating their bloodthirsty actions with Satan and demons. There was also an issue with the Jewish leadership being able to overpower and bully Pontius Pilate, who was very clearly reluctant and regretful in his decision to turn Jesus over to the Jews. Another notable controversy of the film was the gratuitous amounts of blood and gore in the movie, some of which may have been considered over the top. None of this, however, really stopped the film from becoming successful.
Christopher, tell me about Mel Gibson and where he's coming from in doing this.
Well, Mel Gibson has made it easy for us in this speculation. He's a member of a wacko, schismatic sect that rejects the authority of the Pope and specifically rejects the findings of the Second Vatican Council, one of the most important of which was the lifting, after centuries, of the condemnation of the Jewish people for what was once called deicide, for the murder of Christ.
The controversy surrounding these two very iconic pictures have been hotly debated since their releases. Each of these films have found themselves firmly seated in their own respective legacies, not only as controversial films, but as films that are both celebrated and revered in their own respective circles. Mainly Christian religious circles, but especially evangelical groups for The Passion, and the cinephile and critic community for The Temptation. But all these begs the question, who's right about these films? Both films have a very clear divide in audience perception, but is there any merit to the claims of anti-Semitism in The Passion, or to the idea that the portrayal of Jesus in The Last Temptation is sexually perverse and blasphemous? The Last Temptation of Christ is an examination of that very thing, temptation as a human experience. Theologically, in Christianity, Jesus was 100% man and 100% God, a being made of 200%. Mathematically impossible? Absolutely. But it's God, so why is that really even coming into the question? The film dramatizes a Jesus that is struggling with his own purpose in the world, coming to grips with the understanding that what he must do in order to save humanity is die on the cross. He feels immense pressure from being the Son of God, and it is Judas who is actually more enthusiastic of the two in trying to get Jesus to live up to his reputation as the rabbi and leader of what is going to be a revolution amongst the Jews. It's worth noting that the film opens with an excerpt from the Nikos Kazantzakis writing, and a message stating the film is not based on the Gospels and the Bible, but instead the fictional work of Kazantzakis. The qualifying statement that may even disqualify the film at all from being a statement on Christ. However, it's clear throughout the film that the real objective of the film is to really explore the duality of Christ by illuminating the often overlooked human side of Jesus. This is important to not only the story of the film, but the mythos of Jesus himself. Without it, there is no temptation in the desert. It'd be a moot point. It wouldn't even mean anything for a man who cannot be tempted to be tempted by Satan. It wouldn't mean anything for a man who could never be attracted sexually to a woman to be tempted by a prostitute. It wouldn't mean anything for a man who has no qualms of making the ultimate sacrifice to die. That would make him a puppet. But the significance of Jesus is that he was the Son of God, and that it was his destiny, but it didn't come easy. This is where The Last Temptation really shines as a film of theological study. Sure, it is fictionalized, but the purpose of the film isn't meant to be a retread of the already tried ground of looking at Jesus' life through the Gospels. It was meant to explore the side of Jesus that actually makes him like us, the people who he was meant to save, and by extension shows the exact reason for his importance in the first place. But is the film blasphemous? Writer Paul Schrader did an interview with the Toronto International Film Festival where I think he makes the best case for the film.
You know, it's a perfect way to raise money. This film, Hollywood is against our Savior. We are protecting our Savior. Please send us money. So you will get these periodic attacks on art from various fundraising and religious organizations. Ironically, they weren't far from wrong, because it was blasphemous, but it wasn't blasphemous in the way they are thinking. They're thinking blasphemy is just saying something bad about somebody. You know, it's blasphemy if you put a clown nose on Jesus. Well, that's not blasphemy. Okay. That's sacrilege, but not blasphemy. But Constantine's original premise is blasphemy, which is it is not God who creates us, but it is we through our striving who create him. And that Jesus, in fact, was creating God. God wasn't creating him. No, that's blasphemous. But of course, it's blasphemous in a very interesting and complex way. And it's the kind of blasphemy that gives rise to religion. But nobody quite caught on to it that way.
The Passion of the Christ, by Gibson's own admission, is a film which he claims was made to create a visual and historical preservation of the event of the crucifixion. And it was meant to be an accurate look at the Gospels as they were written. However, there are very clear embellishments in the film that are not biblical in nature, and a clear creation of the artist, which in any circumstance would be completely okay. However, the stressing of the accuracy of the film as a visual representation of a historical document ultimately makes the film a little more prone to scrutiny. From the snake in the Garden of Gethsemane, the demonic torture of Judas, Mary witnessing Jesus' torture, which didn't happen. However, some of the most controversial plot points in the film actually were biblical, like Pilate finding Jesus innocent and the Jews calling for his death and the release of Barabbas instead. See Luke 23, where this account is ultimately read. See, historically, the concept of collective guilt of the Jews was a prominent theme in Jewish-Christian relations. It wasn't until the Second Vatican Council in 1962 to 1965, where the idea that the Jews today and their ancestors were historically responsible for the death of Jesus were basically rejected by the Vatican, and instead was altered to the idea that the real fault felt on the authorities of the Jewish temple, something that was seen explored in further detail in Pope Benedict's book, Jesus of Nazareth. But remember how Gibson's father was a Catholic traditionalist? Traditionalist Catholics were seen in somewhat of the same light as cults due to their stringent and unchanging beliefs. They were the main opponents of the Second Vatican Council, the same council that many would say is responsible for relieving some of the anti-Semitic tension that had been seen in the Catholic Church. So, when asking if The Passion of the Christ is an anti-Semitic film, the idea really falls on what is believed about the history of the crucifixion of Jesus. Whose interpretation can be believed? When watching the film's special features, it seems like there really was a genuine effort to present the crucifixion the way it had been written in the Bible.
Foucault, a professor of antiquity and ancient language, a Jesuit, very intelligent, a Bible scholar, devoted 40 years to the study of the scriptures and the Talmud and the Quran, everything. He sort of looked at all these ancient books of the three big religions, and he's just an expert. So he was a major asset and a major resource for me when I'd ask him about theological questions or aspects of the film, like, what does that mean exactly? And he'd be able to sort of like go into that for me a little bit.
The Passion remains a complicated piece of work, and was not helped in any way by Gibson's anti-Semitic drunken tirade that followed the film's release 2 years later. I think it might be safe to say that if there is an anti-Jewish sentiment within the film, it may not have been deliberately put there, but quite possibly a product of Gibson's own biases coming through his work subconsciously. With it being the Easter season, many film fans and cinephiles may be wondering which film should they watch to get the most out of it. A good film will always be a film that starts a conversation. A good movie starts once you leave the theater. By that measure, each of these films would be a good choice, but ultimately it really comes down to what you're trying to get out of the films. The Last Temptation of Christ provides a nuanced look at the humanity of Jesus, and while it's a mostly fictionalized account, its script by Paul Schrader and Jay Cox and its direction by Martin Scorsese have cemented it firmly in the canon of cinema as one of the great spiritual films about the character of Jesus. The Passion of the Christ depicts a rather embellished version of the crucifixion that may be problematic. However, looking past the events of the film that can be interpreted as racist in a modern context, the film really shines as a technical marvel in the canon of films portraying the crucifixion as an event. However, it is ultimately going to be up to you as to whether or not Mel Gibson and this film are rather anti-Semitic or inaccurate in its portrayal of what actually happened 2,000 years ago. Thank you everybody for watching this video essay. I wanted to give you guys something for you guys to check out on Easter. I've done quite a few videos on this topic on my old channel, and I wanted to sort of bring that back. I figured this is the perfect time to do that. So I just wanted to be able to share with you guys something that I think about often, which is these two films and just spirituality and the representation of the faith, specifically Christianity, in film. Something that's always fascinated me, the history of it, as well as like all the different belief systems that go in it and different theological concepts. So yeah, I just wanted to share that with you guys. Hopefully this is a good video. Hopefully helped you guys choose which movie you're going to watch this Easter if you're going to watch a movie about Jesus this Easter. And maybe it helped clarify some things, basically just about the controversies of these two films and maybe what they have to offer. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.